The solemn bells of St. Peter's Basilica marking the passing of Pope Francis earlier this morning. Hello there, everyone, and a warm welcome to a special edition of CBS News 24/7. I'm Errol Barnett in for Vladimir Duthier. Early this morning, the Vatican confirmed Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. He had served as leader of the Catholic Church since 2013 and instilled a progressive and inclusive tone during his papacy. The pontiff spent Easter Sunday greeting well-wishers there in St. Peter's Square. He looped through the square in his Pope mobile. He even blessed babies that were brought up to him. This was just yesterday. In a statement confirming his passing, the Vatican says the Pope, quote, taught us to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially in favor of the poorest and most marginalized. Now we have a live look at Vatican City for you. It's just past 4 p.m. in the afternoon there. Pope Francis experienced health complications in recent years, and you'll all remember that earlier this year he spent 5 weeks in the hospital in February and March after being diagnosed with bronchitis, which developed into pneumonia in both lungs. CBS News special correspondent Norah ODonnell has a look now at the legacy Pope Francis leaves behind.
The Holy Father set the tone with his first official act as Pope, reversing a centuries-old tradition. I want to ask you a favor, he said. Before the bishop blesses the people, I ask that you would pray to the Lord to bless me. He named himself after Francis of Assisi, a saint known for his simplicity and humility. The first pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope said he wanted a poorer church, one that would include the excluded, rather than living in the lavish papal apartments where popes have lived for hundreds of years. He set an example by choosing to live at the Santa Marta, a simple guest house on Vatican grounds.
What an honor.
That's where we met him in April 2024. His desire to reach out to ordinary people sent the bulletproof Pope mobiles into storage. I cannot greet people from inside a sardine can, Francis famously explained, even if it is made of glass. He'd become one of the most popular public figures in the world, regularly speaking up for the voiceless, especially migrants and refugees. During his papacy, he was faced with a wave of clerical sex abuse scandals that stretched to the very highest levels of the church. He was accused at first of being tone deaf in his slow response to the crisis. But then, in 2019, the Pope made sweeping changes to allow for greater accountability and transparency and abolished the top-level confidentiality of pontifical secret.
You have said zero tolerance.
It cannot be tolerated. When there is a case of a religious man or woman who abuses, the full force of the law falls upon them. In this, there has been a great deal of progress.
A few weeks after we interviewed Francis, it was reported that he used a homophobic slur in 2 private meetings. But in his more than a decade as Pope, he voiced support for bringing the LGBTQ community into the church. That push started aboard a papal flight just months into his tenure. Who am I to judge, he said. Hailing from South America, Pope Francis's simple style was a product of his humble beginnings. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in 1936 in Buenos Aires to an immigrant Italian railway worker and a housewife. As a young man, he lost part of a lung to an infection. He was ordained at the late age of 32. Francis claimed he only brought a small bag to the conclave that elected him because he expected to be going back home to Argentina.
Do you like when you are called the People's Pope?
El Papa de la gente.
Instead, he became one of the oldest popes in history, having traveled to more than 60 countries and keeping a busy schedule until the final days of his life.
What do you hope your legacy is?
I never really thought about it. The church is the legacy. The church not only through the Pope, but through you, through every Christian, through everyone. Personally, I get on the bandwagon of the church and its legacy for all.
I mean, That the church is for everybody.
Para todos.
Yes, for everybody.
How about that? A pope who does not think about their legacy? For more on the passing of Pope Francis, I'm joined now by Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo. He is a CBS News papal and a Vatican contributor. My condolences to you, but I appreciate you joining us on what is such an important day. I was surprised there to hear Pope Francis say, what's my legacy? It's not about me, it's about the church and the legacy of the church. What, though, in your view, is the legacy of Pope Francis and his more than a decade leading the world's billion-plus Catholics?
Thanks, Errol. Thanks. This is a day of shock for us, and I appreciate your comments. The great legacy of Pope Francis, he was the people's Pope. He wanted to be with the people. He wanted to be with the underdog, those who were marginalized, those who were at the peripheries of society. And we saw that even yesterday. His last act was to go around the crowds here in St. Peter's Square, greeting, blessing, taking babies into his Pope mobile, and his very last words to give us all hope, Happy Easter. I really believe that's his greatest legacy, to give us hope.
He was given strict orders by the doctors who kept him alive during his 5 weeks in hospital. He was told to stay away from the balcony, stay away from the public, to stay in his apartment and heal. Going out and being with people would risk his health. Why do you think Pope Francis decided to do his own thing, go his own way, and make contact with people in what he likely would have known would have been his last few weeks on earth?
Absolutely. Pope Francis was a shepherd, and the shepherd who wanted to give of himself to the very end. And so in that real sense, he was his own man who did what he felt needed to be done in his heart. And he wanted to show us how to live well, particularly loving, caring for the others, but also how to die well. He's been in the hospital for 5 weeks on death's doorstep, but even in death, he said, we can continue to love, we can continue to give of ourselves, and that, I really believe, is what Francis wants us to do, particularly looking after those who are most in need the most care in society, not to be on a pedestal, not pomp and power, but to be a simple, humble shepherd of souls.
Yeah, that sense of humility, a constant thread I'm seeing and hearing today. When it comes to the change that Pope Francis was and was not able to bring to the church, he elevated the status of migrants, but was not able to elevate the status of women within the church as much as he would have liked. How do you assess the change that he brought?
This has been a revolutionary pope in many ways, just in his nomination of cardinals from the peripheries where he's lived, the nations he's visited, not the traditional powerful nations. And certainly in terms of women, it's a work in progress. We do need to remember that Pope Francis has appointed to top positions here in the Vatican women, including very recently as the governor of the entire Vatican state, a woman. So in many ways, this work is unstoppable now. Pope Francis has made inroads in such dramatic, revolutionary ways that it's going to be very difficult to turn the tide back. And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, we appreciate you joining us from Rome with your insight, Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo. Thanks for your time today. At this point, we want to jump over and bring in Monsignor Kevin Owen from the Archdiocese of New York. He's also served as the Dean of the School of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic University of America. Good morning to you. My condolences, and I appreciate you making time for us. What is your perspective on what many are reading as shocking news? Pope Francis being so public over the weekend for Easter Sunday and passing on Little Easter or Easter Monday. What's your reaction?
My reaction is that he didn't obey his doctor. My doctor said if he's out and about with crowds, he's liable to die pretty quickly. He can catch anything, and yet he went outside and talked to people. He touched them. And he worked to the bitter end, and he was a tenacious man and knew his mind, and that's what happened.
And how does this perhaps change the method in which the next pope will be selected? We've got these 9 days of mourning, so I don't think anyone is supposed to speak out loud about who will be next as far as Catholics there. But how will this change the process of who will be selected?
Well, my sense of it is that when he was hospitalized, the cardinals began to think, who's going to be next? I think they were not really shocked at the timing, but certainly they're not unprepared to go to a conclave and realize who may want to vote as a successor. Before the conclave, there are several days of meetings of the cardinals when they give speeches, and that's kind of the beginning of real discussion about who it should be.
What I find interesting during our coverage today is that you've got some 20% of Americans who identify themselves as Catholic, and those numbers have been shrinking in the most recent years. We know that the Catholic population in the U.S. is slightly older than the general population by comparison, and I think a third are Hispanic. What do you think American Catholics want to see from the next pope?
Well, I think they want to see a continuation of the invitational manner, being accompanied and not being lectured from on top. I think that comes out of our ethos of a certain amount of common good that we bring to this. And we want to see a pope that will listen to us and be open to us as this pope has been. And I think they would look forward to a continuation of at least some of his initiatives.
And for you, the largest imprint that Pope Francis left on your life?
Well, he didn't stay home. He was a 47-trip guy. He's a big picture pope. So his first document was on the environment. That was a brand new thing for the Vatican, a whole new document on the environment, interconnectedness, the concern about the world. And then the other document at the end, toward the end, was about interreligious dialogue and how Catholics and Muslims and Catholics are in this together, and how we can make God credible to a world that seems not to want to have God credible.
Quite a message to leave on, Monsignor Kevin Owen. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you.
Very welcome.
Now, one of Pope Francis's final visitors was this man, Vice President J.D. Vance. We're also hearing from the Vice President and President right now. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brown joins us from the White House with reaction there. Natalie, when we spoke earlier this morning, I think we only had a social media message from the White House and nothing additional from the President. What's the update? I know that there's an annual Easter egg roll that will be underway soon as well.
Yeah. Hi, Errol. So we are expecting to see President Trump shortly within the hour. We'll have to wait and see whether he makes comments on camera regarding Pope Francis. Since we last spoke, we do have a social media post by the president himself. He said, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him." Now, earlier this morning, the White House social media account put out a picture of President Trump's meeting with Pope Francis from back in 2017, and then J.D. Vance's visit, as you referenced, just yesterday.
And what's interesting about that image of the Vice President meeting the Pope is that it came amid a bit of tension between the Vatican and the White House, as there was a delay in the meeting, and we know that Pope Francis has spoken out against some of President Trump's policies recently and during his first administration. Help us understand the relationship between the two.
Yeah, Pope Francis and the Trump administration, both during the first administration and the second one, have clashed, particularly over policies related to immigration, the president's mass deportation plan, which Pope Francis called a disgrace. So it was unclear whether this meeting would happen between the Pope and Vice President J.D. Vance, who converted to Catholicism a few years ago and did end up up getting that meeting during his travels to Rome and the Vatican. We saw that picture shaking hands in exchange of gifts. It's been reported that Pope Francis gave the vice president 3 chocolate eggs for his young children, also a tie and some rosaries. We're told this was a very brief meeting, but the vice president's office says that he expressed gratitude for making time for that meeting and also the hospitality extended to his family. But we also know that there was a meeting between the vice president and top Vatican officials during which there was this exchange of opinions, as they put it, on some of these big topics, specifically immigration. And also we know the Holy See has called for has pushed back against cuts to international aid and also wanting peaceful resolutions to the wars in Ukraine and also the conflict between Hamas and Israel. Errol.
All right, Natalie Brand with the latest for us at the White House. Natalie, thanks so much. And a coverage note for you all. Tonight, CBS News will re-air Norah ODonnell's historic interview with the Holy Father. Pope Francis I with Norah ODonnell airs tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern here on CBS News 24/7 and on Paramount+. Still to come for you, we'll take you live to St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, where Pope Francis's followers are coming out in droves this morning. We'll bring you live coverage of that after this short break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. We continue to follow the news of the death of Pope Francis at the age of 88. More than 1.3 billion Catholics around the world are in mourning right now, and 65 million of them are here in the U.S. I want to bring in CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste. She's getting more reaction from people at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. It's a real landmark, Nikki. I know that the Archbishop of the New York Archdiocese, Timothy Cardinal Dolan, spoke this morning, and you were there to hear it all. What was he saying, and what are those coming to the church telling you?
Hi, Errol. Yes, I went inside St. Patrick's a bit ago when Cardinal Dolan was speaking about Pope Francis. He actually got a call around 4 a.m. this morning, learning of the Pope's passing. He talked about a great leader. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say.
He taught us that who we are is more important than what we can do. He couldn't do much. He could barely raise his hand yesterday, did you see? He could barely speak. He couldn't do much, but what he was, as a child of God, created in God's image and likeness, destined for all eternity.
Cardinal Dolan said, given the timing of Pope Francis' passing, he said he really couldn't have choreographed it any better the day after Easter. Cardinal Dolan himself had been planning to go to Rome tomorrow already. He will continue that trip. I will note that he is one of the cardinals who is eligible to vote in the conclave, which will be coming up. I've also been watching as worshipers go in. This church is getting busier throughout the morning. I've spoken with a few people, some from the U.S., some from overseas. There was an Italian family entering who said they hadn't planned to come to this church today, but when they heard about the passing of Pope Francis, they had to come to say goodbye. His picture is on display inside St. Patrick's here. I spoke with another woman who is not a Catholic, but she said she wanted to come pay her respects to a man she found had great humility and humanity.
It's an interesting point, Nikki, not just on how far the Catholic faith kind of stretches, but how those who are not Catholic also found what Pope Francis did as Pope real useful and meaningful. I'm wondering if any special events will be taking place at that church this week, or what comes next for American Catholics who maybe won't be able to head to Rome.
Actually, a worshiper just asked me what would be happening in this church today. There was a special mass dedicated to the Pope at 7 a.m. led by Cardinal Dolan. And I think a big question a lot of people are asking one another is, what do we expect from the next Pope? I asked one man here who is a Catholic. I said, what do you hope to see? He said, honestly, I'm pretty content with the Catholic Church. I also spoke with a Catholic clergy abuse survivor who I've known over the years from my reporting on that topic. And I said, what do you want to see? He said, look, we need a Pope who will make changes when it comes to child sex abuse. He said, yes, Pope Francis always said it was a crime, but he never made it a crime under canon law, and that is what they want to see, what Catholic clergy abuse survivors hope to see with the next pope. Errol?
Interesting point, Nikki, and we'll discuss that further. Thank you very much, Nikki Batiste, joining us from here in New York City. People in Vatican City and really around the world are mourning the death of Pope Francis today. Global leaders are paying their respects and remembering the pontiff's legacy. The Vatican will observe a 9-day period of mourning now. Francis must be buried within 4 to 6 days after his death. The papal conclave will then begin after that period of mourning, and the church will choose its next leader. CBS News papal contributor Candida Moss joins us now with more on what to expect next. Great to have you with us again, Candida. I know it's been a long morning for you as well. We just heard from our correspondent here in New York, Nikki Batiste, reference that some Catholic sexual abuse survivors wish that Pope Francis would have done more. We've also heard from some bishops earlier who say that the Pope did an incredible amount as a humble man and really prioritized the people. What do you think is the lasting legacy for Pope Francis, and what are the areas in which maybe Catholics don't feel as if he did enough?
It's a great question, and thanks for having me. So it seems to me that Pope Francis's biggest impact has been in the way he has reshaped the College of Cardinals. The people who elect the next Pope are going to represent a global church, including people in South America, in Africa, and in Asia. And that affects which of the issues Francis prioritized during his papacy will be on the docket. He did take steps towards fixing things around sex abuse scandals in the church. But as we've already heard, more could be done then, including listening to survivors of abuse themselves. He has spoken widely about the environment, about the plight of immigrants and migrants around the world, and he has persistently in the last 2 years called for peace around the world. In terms of his legacy, I think our next Pope is going to have a lot of pressure on him to be a simple man of humility like Pope Francis, who led through example, and to choose for himself whether or not he wants to continue to press in the progressive direction in which Francis was taking the church.
And that's another aspect that you and I have discussed today, which is that just because Pope Francis was perceived as more progressive than his predecessor does not necessarily mean that will continue to be the case with the next Pope, especially because of where the other people who will be voting for the next Pope are coming from. I'm noting Africa specifically, where they're much more conservative on issues related to women and LGBTQ people. So considering that Pope Francis changed the papal conclave almost in his image, I think nominating 80% of them, what is the outcome likely to be from this next gathering?
Well, there was an opportunity to kind of sort of rig it for his successor. But of course, he didn't choose to do that. As you already noted, African cardinals tend to be much more conservative on social issues like the inclusivity that Francis displayed towards LGBT people, gender roles, the role of women in the church, and divorced and remarried Catholics. And so I think what we're going to see is a new pope who is going to have to appeal to Catholics from around the world, not just the issues that dominate European and North American Catholicism, but also issues of poverty, of inclusivity for people from other religions, and also for issues of immigration, and perhaps also the social issues that dominate the church in Africa.
And we will be watching that very closely. Candida, thanks for connecting with us again this morning. Really appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Let's bring in Dr. Joseph Capizzi now. He's Dean of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic University of America. I want to pick up with you where we just left off on what this next pope might bring. We've got rounds of voting that will take place. Help us understand, after these 9 days of mourning, what exactly happens next and how this next pope will be elevated.
Sure. As you said, there will be rounds of voting that will take place among the College of Cardinals. Those cardinals who are under the age of 80 years old and eligible to vote will gather together at the Vatican, and they'll do this in a series of days, probably, during which time they'll deliberate with each other about which direction, which man they think best exemplifies the character to take the church forward from Pope Francis's papacy.
I'm also fascinated to know that many of them don't know each other. Many of them will be meeting one another for the first time as they head to Rome to mourn the passing of the Pope. So in what ways might they group along language or beliefs that at least gives them a sense of the room and who might be a forerunner?
Yeah, I have to be careful, of course, speaking about this because I don't know many of these new men either.
Right, sure.
And of course, the context will really determine how they come together. I think you're right to anticipate a lot of it will be linguistic, although many of the cardinals will speak Italian because they've been in Rome many times, and many of them were trained in Rome. So Italian may be, the sort of universal language, but there still will be affinities that will develop, and those will influence conversation and the sort of groupings that occur. But probably you can anticipate newer cardinals, especially newer, younger cardinals, will be drawn towards candidates by their older peers. So blocks will develop for sure, as they always have. The reporting is always typically, of course, post hoc. But it's going to be an exciting time for all of us to pay attention to.
And in the last few seconds, what will you remember most from Pope Francis's time?
Everybody's spoken about his humility, but I think another aspect of his character that was quite evident all the time was his great sense of humor. And that was what made him so human and accessible. He was a man who enjoyed meeting people as they were and finding humor in the situations of life that I thought was extraordinarily inviting.
Yeah, humor really can transcend all. Dr. Joseph Capizzi, we appreciate you joining us. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, we will take you back to Rome live as tributes continue to pour in following the passing of Pope Francis. You're in the right place, streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Errol Barnett. We continue to follow the passing of Pope Francis at the age of 88. Now, Francis has served as pontiff since 2013 and truly left his stamp on the Catholic Church. He called for inclusiveness for members of the LGBTQ+ community, and he called for mercy for marginalized people. Let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay, who is in Rome and has been tracking reaction to all of this. And Chris, most of our viewers will be aware of that hospitalization earlier this year, the 5 weeks where it was really touch and go with Pope Francis struggling with his health. Why, in your view, did he want to be so visible and so close to people during his last few days, despite guidance from doctors to stay isolated?
Well, Errol, to use a phrase, he wanted to smell like the sheep. That's something that Pope Francis himself said, referring to his flock and himself as the shepherd. He wanted to get his hands dirty and be among the people. That's something that set himself apart from previous papacies. Gone were a lot of the papal regalia, some of the splendor, some would argue, surrounding the papacy. This modest pope chose to drive in a 500 Fiat vehicle, for instance, on his inauguration as pope, when he was named pope. You'll remember he said good evening to the world. I mean, with this down-to-earthness about him that just stayed with him throughout the entire 12 years of his papacy. And that's the same impulse, we're told by people close to him, that pushed him to defy doctors' orders and come and be among the people during Holy Week. That's the week leading up to Easter, the holiest day in the entire Catholic Church, indeed in all of Christianity. He was told to stay at home for 2 months when he was discharged from the hospital for double pneumonia. That was just 3 weeks ago. So he clearly jumped the gun. And everybody who knows Pope Francis knew that that was a tall order, getting him to stay indoors, to stay away from the crowds, especially during Holy Week, because after all, he is the Pope. He got to call the shots, and it was his decision to leave the residence where he lives. One time, about a week and a half ago, he wasn't even wearing his papal attire. He wasn't wearing the zucchetto, that's the skull cap. He was wearing black pants. He was covered in a poncho. We're told by people close to him that was his decision to just go into St. Peter's Basilica. It was his decision to go into St. Peter's Square on Palm Sunday and be surrounded by tens of thousands of people. His decision to go to a prison on Holy Thursday just a few days ago, and interact quite closely with the 70 inmates there. And then, of course, on Easter Sunday, to get in the Pope Mobile, ride around, being one with the people, deliver his Easter blessing. All of this was his decision. And as a close personal aide told me, when I asked him, how does it feel to see Pope Francis throwing caution to the wind like this? I mean, he nearly died, after all, when he was in the hospital. According to his doctors, they considered letting him go. Such was the severity of that double pneumonia. How does it feel to now see him risking it all? And he told me, Chris, Pope Francis wants to die on the battlefield. This is how he would have wanted to go. Errol.
Yeah, so interesting, Chris. And, you know, the rest of us will never really see the inner workings of the Catholic Church there at Vatican City. We know that once a new pope is selected, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance. The white smoke is seen around the world. But I was also quite surprised when you shared with me earlier this morning the manner in which you were told the news of the Pope's passing, and how humble, how small, for lack of a better term, it was. Help our viewers understand how things unfolded for you today.
Yeah, Errol, it was indeed understated. So there's a Telegram channel to follow the press office of the Holy See, and we were told just before 10 o'clock this morning that there was going to be a live broadcast from Casa Santa Marta. That is the residence where Pope Francis lives. And that was very bizarre. I'd never seen anything like that, a live broadcast from his residence. So I quickly went over to that channel, where I was listening to the Camerlengo, that's the Chamberlain of the Vatican, making this very somber announcement that Pope Francis had died during the night. And that was it. It was very, very succinct, and it was over in just a minute or so. And then, of course, the news spread, as did all of the people flocking here to St. Peter's Square. I indeed was one of them. And again, just the deafening silence that hung over this square is something I don't think I'll ever forget.
Yeah, and we're not even 12 hours into this news being absorbed around the world. Chris Livesay, live for us in Rome. Chris, thank you. Now, the Catholic Church has a centuries-old legacy that has garnered followers truly across the globe. Popes of Italian origin have been appointed for the past 450 years. Then Pope John Paul II, who is Polish, stepped in. Germany's Pope Benedict led the church for nearly 8 years, you'll remember, and Pope Francis became the first Latin American pope. Nearly 1.4 billion people identify as Catholic. You see where they're spread out here. The country with the largest population of Catholics is Brazil, then Mexico and the Philippines, followed by the US and Italy. In the United States, roughly 20 million people are Catholic. Let's bring in James Grimaldi now. He's the executive editor at the National Catholic Reporter and can give us some more context in the differences of Catholics globally. Great to have you with us. My condolences to you. I just first want to get your sense at this hour of either shock or surprise since we saw Pope Francis over the weekend, and what this means to Catholics everywhere.
Well, it's a shock, but not a surprise, right? I mean, he did not look well at all over the weekend. And, you know, I'm going through various stages of grief, I'll admit. And one of them is, which is common for a stage of grief, is a little bit of anger at Pope Francis, because he was, you know, a stubborn, foolish old man at times, and he insisted on going out and being with the people. But that's who he is, and that's also why we loved him so much, right? Because he reached out to the marginalized. You know, he wanted to go to the vigil service. He was unable to do any of the masses, but he showed up 2 hours before the vigil service to pray. He then got up the next morning and met with Vice President J.D. Vance who had scheduled his trip over the busiest week of the year at the Vatican. And then he went out on the loggia yesterday for the Urbi et Orbi to the world and to the city and the world blessing and statement. He didn't read the statement read by one of his archbishops, but he gave the papal blessing. He said, "Happy Easter." People cheered "Viva el Papa," long live the Pope. And then sadly, he's dead.
When we spoke earlier with one of our Catholic experts, John Allen, he shared with me a saying in which a fat pope is commonly followed by a skinny pope, meaning that there's relatively little consistency from pope to pope for good reason. So as we outline the different types of Catholics around the world, what might we expect from the next Catholic pope? It might not be someone more progressive than Pope Francis, for example.
Well, John Allen, for years, was our Vatican correspondent for ncronline.org, a national Catholic reporter. So I endorse anything John Allen says. I'm a huge fan of his work. I wish he were writing for us. But yeah, I think, there's some favorites out there. I can tell you somebody asked me yesterday who I thought the favorite would be. And I also think that the favorite will probably not be that person, right? And there's another old saying that John Allen probably told you, he who walks into the conclave of Pope often walks out as a cardinal, which is a way of saying whoever is the favorite going in is not always who gets elected. And we don't know what God has planned for us for our next Pope. And I suspect it could be a surprise, but I do think there are a couple of favorites if you want to talk about that.
Well, James, we have run out of time, but you do know John, because that is precisely the other quote he shared with me today. So good to know he still gets
I'm sorry,
your
I missed it. I didn't mean to repeat it.
No, all good. You've been busy, we understand. James Grimaldi, still great to speak with you on what is such an important day. Thanks for your time.
Yes, no, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Now, in Pope Francis's Easter Sunday remarks, he urged peace in places like Ukraine and Gaza. Next, we'll look at the pontiff's impact on world politics after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. During what is now his final public address, Pope Francis spoke yesterday and appealed for peace in Gaza and Ukraine, as well as in other conflict zones. Speaking to crowds at the Vatican yesterday, the late pontiff called for a ceasefire in the Middle East and the release of hostages. He also prayed for peace in Ukraine, urging both Russia and Ukraine to pursue efforts to achieve a, quote, just and lasting peace. For more on the legacy of Pope Francis, I'm joined by Dr. Lyanna Fix. She's a fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks for connecting with us today. So what's the overview, the big picture? What impact did Pope Francis have on geopolitics, if any?
So the Pope obviously has a special position, what he can do. The Vatican has diplomatic relations, but most importantly is the moral voice of the Pope in those negotiations, in those crisis zones, in international affairs in general. A good example for that is, for example, that both Ukraine and Russia have listened to the Pope and to his ideas of peace, although they might have disagreed with some things that he proposed. Other big examples were that the Pope was an outspoken voice on migration and on welcoming migrants. He was also an outspoken voice on the question of climate change, inspiring the younger generation. And just quoting from the biography of the German former Chancellor Angela Merkel, also a world leader, she even went to Pope Francis to ask for his advice on how to deal with the first Trump administration. And he said, well, bend, 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 but don't break. This shows the influence in terms of advice, but also in direct peace initiatives that a Pope can have and that this Pope had in international affairs.
And did he reframe in any way the types of engagement a pope can have when it comes to engaging on global issues?
Yes, so he has very successfully reframed what he sees as his concern for the marginalized in the context of international affairs. So, for example, when it comes to climate change, he said, well, climate change I do care about because the marginalized in the society will be affected by that. And he has conducted not only shuttle diplomacy, but he has also gone to unusual places to pursue his diplomatic efforts. So that is something that we have not seen from every pope, and that is very peculiar to Pope Francis.
And we were just looking at file footage now from the Pope meeting President Trump and the First Lady, as well as the Obamas at the White House and addressing the UN. Dr. Lyanna Fix, thanks for joining us and sharing your insight.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And do stick around for more special coverage of the passing of Pope Francis. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. Pope Francis achieved several firsts during his time as leader of the Catholic Church. Our Norah ODonnell reports.
Pope Francis's impact on the Catholic Church has been extraordinary. The first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the church has been around 2,000 years. He's the first to choose the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi, the patron known for his dedication to poverty and peace. Last April, we interviewed the Holy Father. Never before had the Supreme Pontiff sat down for an extended, wide-ranging conversation with an American broadcast network. And even then, at age 87 years old, he was having some health issues, using a wheelchair because of his knee. But he was engaging, warm and sharp. We spent more than an hour with him, and we talked about how he wanted to be remembered.
Do you like when you are called the People's Pope?
El Papa de la gente.
The Pope of the people? I've always been a pastor. You are a pastor for the people, not for yourself. A pastor has to be for the people.
What do you hope your legacy is?
I never really thought about it. The church is the legacy. The church not only through the Pope, but through you, through every Christian, through everyone. Personally, I get on the bandwagon of the church and its legacy for all.
You mean that the church is for everybody?
Yes, for everybody, and in particular for the privileged. Do you know who are the privileged in the church? The sinners. We, the sinners, are the privileged ones, because Jesus came to call upon us sinners, all of us.
Somos los privilegiados. Esto que no lo olvide nadie cuando siente que tiene una conciencia.
The Lord forgives everything, everything. It is we who get tired of asking for forgiveness.
Nosotros los que nos cansamos de pedir perdón.
You know, translated from the original Latin, the word pontiff means bridge builder. Francis tried to build the bridge from the Pope to the people. Remember, he even sent the bulletproof Pope mobiles into storage. I remember when he said, "I cannot greet people from inside a sardine can." Incredible sense of humor. And that's part of the reason he was called the People's Pope. I'm Norah ODonnell at the Vatican.
And tonight, CBS News will re-air all of Norah ODonnell's historic interview with the Holy Father. Pope Francis I with Norah ODonnell airs tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS News 24/7 and on Paramount+. And a quick bit of news, President Trump has ordered all flags to fly at half-staff. That does it for me. I'll see you tomorrow on the CBS Morning News at 7 a.m., but stay right where you are. Mugo Odigwe continues our coverage live from San Francisco next.